Well, we've heard from Bob Gleason on the statistics that demonstrate the path our region has followed, and we're now going to have an opportunity to hear from a couple of experts who can help describe some of the consequences of the conditions that the region has faced in past decades. First, I do want to thank, on behalf of Mike and myself, Lisa Barno for all of her help with the Mayor's Association for co-hosting this program, and also Jennifer Kuzma from the First Suburbs for the help that she's provided. Our first speaker is going to be Joanna Ganning. Joanna is the Associate Dean of the Levin College. She's also an Associate Professor who teaches economic development, research methods, urban economics, and policy. Joanna is an expert in the use of quantitative methodologies to study the economic processes of communities that have been marginalized either by geography or by decline or by socioeconomic factors, with the goal of using that data to help those communities to improve the life of everybody living in them. And our second speaker is going to be Hunter Morrison. Hunter is a senior fellow at the Levin College. Hunter was the executive director of the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, which developed the Vibrant NEO Plan. He's been a director of campus planning at Youngstown State. He serves the city of Youngstown in planning, and he is, as we heard from Chris Ronay, past director of planning for the city of Cleveland. Joanna?
It is a beautiful morning in the land. Thank you for spending it here with us at Cleveland State. It's my pleasure to be with you and to share some of the research that I've done over the last handful of years. I'm going to use some speaker prerogative here to tell you a little bit more about why this event is here at CSU, why there are so many CSU alums and faces that are in this room. The Levin College is home to a PhD-accredited Master of Urban Planning and Development program, and our students are strongly interested in the issues discussed in the Vibrant NEO framework. Many of our alumni, which include many of you in this room actually, including Chris Ronay and others, have been involved in projects inspired by or aligned with the framework that we're talking about today. In the classroom, we continue to use it as a teaching tool. I took a lot of pride in listening to your talk. There was a whole lot of UST 605 that showed up there. And a model as an award-winning planning framework. In planning practice, the Levin College's senior fellows, who you've met some of them already this morning, you'll meet some more of them or hear from them. They work or have worked in practice, and you'll hear from them about ideas connecting to contemporary practice for our region and ways to promote regional sustainability through local decision making. Our involvement in these conversations has been extensive. In fact, the Levin College was recently named as the regional champion for Vibrant NEO about a little over a year ago. In planning research over the years, the college has been involved in many, many efforts to study regionalism. The one I'm most familiar with has been the Faculty Working Group on Regionalism, which I participated in and led. We met over several years to research two projects, both of which were award winners from the Vibrant NEO framework, Cuyahoga Greenways and the Mahoning River Corridor Initiative, and I'm going to tell you a little bit later what I learned in that effort. Beyond these intersections, the college was heavily involved in the development of the Vibrant NEO framework itself. Ned Hill, the former dean of this college, provided leadership to the grant-seeking process and to the execution of the project. He contributed the regional economic development section of the final report. Stuart Mandel represented the college on the NEAS board. Kirby Date, who's here, wrote the project scope and schedule, which guided the complex process. She led the Quality Connected Places workstream, which sought to integrate the work of the other 4 regional committees. Mark Salling headed the GIS committee, and Tom Byer worked closely with a consultant team and an interagency management group to ensure census data inputs and resultant outputs reflected patterns of growth. And Kathy Hexter worked on practically all aspects of the project, I think, at different times. This is even still an inexhaustive accounting of the ways that CSU was involved in this project. So let's talk about the framework itself. I think most of you are familiar with it, but a review never hurt anybody. So you'll hear from Hunter here in a few minutes about some of the scenarios and choices presented by the framework. One of them pertains to development patterns. You either grow outward onto greenfield sites or inward, creating density. Relevant to the research I'll show you is the framework's guidance about the implications of these choices. Outward migration requires new infrastructure and results in abandonment. Inward investment helps existing communities remain whole. A second choice involves a pattern of that development, dispersed or compact. At the local level, it may be tempting to feel that you will attract home buyers with large lots and big homes, but the issues planners see arise down the line result from these choices. Public transportation is not compatible with this style of growth. Reducing regional infrastructure costs becomes next to impossible. Walkability and diversity issues are more challenging yet. I will end my talk with research on the central issue that relates to this, which is the local government bottom line. The urge to attract the market can easily result in long-term net negative revenue for local governments choosing to develop this way. And the state often does not help, which I will also talk about. This is what we've been doing. This is a direct quote from the county. Despite a development pattern in which developed property, the red areas on these maps, covered over twice the land area in 2000 that it did in 1950, the county's actual population in those 2 years was nearly identical, like within a few thousand people of being identical, actually. The map on the right is a lot more expensive to maintain. More roads, more schools, more sewer, more water management, more of everything. And if there are fewer people living in each house, each person's per capita housing cost is also a lot higher. The idea that we can avoid paying higher taxes by, I'm going to say it, moving to Medina is a highly individualized method of confronting the very clear financial problem associated with our collective choices. This is a really expensive way to live. And in the long term, if we continue to develop the way we have, if we continue the sprawl that Dr. Gleason told us about, if we continue to go the way we have, this is from the Vibrant Neo framework, we end up in a situation where all local governments, even the best off among them, have greater costs than they do revenue coming in. It is really expensive to live the way we are developing in our region. A little more doom and gloom for you, a little bit more. How is this happening? Using data from HUD and from the Census Bureau, I made this chart for the 5 NOACA counties. From 1990 through 2015, this 5-county region pulled 135,000 permits for new housing units. Meanwhile, there were 41,000 new households to fill them. So we built 3.5 times more housing in this region than we had new households to fill those units. 3.5 times. Now, no developer, no home builder is going to build for no one. We don't build ghost properties on purpose. So how does this happen? It works by creating vacancy in the core. That's how it happens. You see Cuyahoga County losing households, occupied housing units here, and you see all this growth, and this is why I picked on Medina over there. They have the highest bar on the right, so I picked on them. That is how this happens, is that you create vacancy in the core. Cuyahoga County lost 30,000 households over this period. Then, using slightly more recent data, I can tell you about this in a different way. The Cleveland urbanized area, which is the light gray area on this map, from 2010 to 2018, we built in just this light gray area, which is a much smaller footprint, we built 16,000 more housing units than we had new households to fill them over that 8-year period. The overbuilding does not correspond to a one-to-one abandonment or the creation of vacancy. A lot of this housing development is turning over the housing stock. It's creating new and attractive housing units. It's replacing things that we tore down because they were uninhabitable or had been lost to fire or other reasons. They're replacing failing units. But the fact remains that we build a lot more than we have new households to fill those units. This is an animated slide. The inconvenient truth of all of this is that the overbuilding does produce vacancy, and rather a lot of it. Through research, I have found that a 1% overbuilding rate corresponds to 9.6 times as many vacant units in the urbanized areas around shrinking cities, places like Cleveland, Detroit, Buffalo, Milwaukee, as it does in the Houstons and Tallahassees of America. At the median, though, shrinking cities like Cleveland do not experience 1% overbuilding rates. At the median, we experience a 1.95, almost a 2% regional overbuilding rate. And at the median, this results in 1,464 new vacancies over a 6-year period. Between 2010 and 2019, the Cleveland urbanized area, that light gray footprint I showed you, gained 14,573 more housing units than new households. Cleveland's regional overbuilding resulted in 1,324 new vacancies in the city of Cleveland alone from 2013 to 2019. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you here. This equates to 221 new vacancies per year, and nearly 1 new vacancy for every 10 excess units built in the region. A fee corresponding to the costs of managing induced housing vacancy. I know what you're thinking, Joanna, you can't do that. That's accurate. We can't do that, but I'm hopeful that some day we can. So a fee corresponding to the cost of this could be a corrective policy intervention. Those costs, which must be estimated locally or regionally, they vary substantially across the country, could include legal fees, real estate transaction fees, demolition costs, maintenance costs, and, if applicable, land remediation costs, which can be astronomical. Even if the fee covered only the cost of demolition, which is estimated locally at $10,817 per home, the city of Cleveland would see $2.4 million per year in new funds for demolition. That is, if we tack a fee onto suburban development that is excessive to cover the cost of vacancy created by that market failure, this is how much it would cost. I have been told by people who live elsewhere that this policy intervention is too small to talk about. It's only 221 units. It's only $2.4 million. And I have assured them that the leaders of the city of Cleveland would be very happy to receive $2.4 million per year in demolition assistance. It's easy to understand why municipalities engage in the type of overbuilding that we see. We continue to see all of these subdivisions popping up at our urban fringe, a sprawl. And it's easy to understand why it happens. It's financial. It's about bottom line. The state of Ohio has not made it easy for local governments to balance their books, continually cutting local funding over the past 15 years. This figure was developed by Erica Henriksen, an extraordinarily talented recent graduate of this college. And what this shows is that by time period, the legislative changes made by the state impacted local governments. Erica also curated a listing of the financial impact each change had for Northeast Ohio, and systematically collected newspaper articles showing sentiment about these changes as expressed by local leaders. Routinely, local leaders reflected that they would have to look harder for local sources of revenue. And what were those local sources of revenue to make up for all of these gaps? Building. That's how they decided. That's the tool that was left to cover the gap. Attract residents, attract businesses, grow our way out of this problem in a region that is essentially, as we've seen, not growing. It's easy to understand. Now, so you may notice this ends in 2019, and I know everyone here is paying attention to these things. This situation has continued. The situation illustrated here has continued, and there's been recent news about this for local governments and their bottom lines from the state. Another consequence of overbuilding, we talked about vacancy, but another consequence is that it moves jobs to the periphery. I'm going to quibble with you publicly here a little bit, Bob, because it was in my dissertation. Households move first and businesses follow.
Chicken or the egg?
Yeah, I've got the receipts. Okay, so this bar chart shows in the dark orange a regional job change from 2010 to 2015. So this was post-recession. And as the nation moved ahead, all regions gained jobs. Shrinking city regions like Cleveland, like St. Louis, like Milwaukee, those regions and non-shrinking regions of Tallahassee's and Dallas's, they all in aggregate saw about a 5% job growth rate over that period of time. But in shrinking city regions like Cleveland, the job growth happened farther and farther from residents of central cities. The city of Cleveland residents saw their job accessibility levels get worse over this period of time. But in non-shrinking cities, in the Tallahassees of the world, central cities shared in the growth, seeing gains in their residents' ability to get to work. Because if you're building outward because you have new people, you are expanding the pie. If you are growing outward and you don't have new people, you are thinning the pie. You are making it harder for everyone there to access what you have. And I'm going to go off script here a bit to say that in the 10 plus years I've been studying urban decline from the perspective of regional economic development policy, I have come strongly to the conclusion that I'm not going to talk any of you out of hoping for growth one day. But what I will try to talk you into is saying that I run marathons for fun, okay? You might say, look, I have this time goal for my marathon and I know how I want for this race to end. But you still have to have a strategy for the first mile. You still have to have a strategy for the 5K that comes after that. You've got to have a strategy for when you get to mile 20 and it gets really hard. You still have to have the discipline and the capability to stay the course at that point. And what I have come to really believe is that the most important thing for regions like Cleveland to do is to focus right now on improving the quality of life for people who have chosen to stay here. Because when you get people back to work, when you decrease unemployment, when you increase the labor force participation rate, you improve the quality of life for everyone here. That work improves neighborhoods. That work improves sentiment. That work improves the viability of the whole region. So I would love it. I would love it if we could stop the obsession with growth. We have 50 years of data. And Mark Souther's book, Believing in Cleveland, is a must-read on this topic. But I acknowledge I'm probably not going to win you over on that. But I will try to win you over very, very hard on believing that the strategy for this 10 miles of this race needs to be improving the lives of people who are here now. So looking to the future, in the fall of 2017, as I mentioned, I organized this working group on regionalism here in the college. And I thought we would focus on economic transportation and fiscal sustainability and other fun things like that. And we did. We did those things. And I learned so much. It was really a lot of fun. But we eventually conducted comparative case studies of Cuyahoga Greenways and the Mahoning River Corridor Initiative. I realize I'm about out of time here. These are both past Vibrant NEO award-winning projects. And we wondered whether the expansive literature on regional collaboration, which often comes up as a potential strategy for these financial problems we've talked about, collaborate with each other, share snowplow services, share call centers, right? This is a common idea. So these were award-winning collaborative projects, and we wondered whether what we know as scholars guided those collaborations or not. And what we found was that the existing literature on regional collaboration did explain Cuyahoga Greenways really pretty well. But the MRC stakeholders, it was a pretty different situation. They lacked institutions and networks for regional scale collaboration. They were spread across 2 counties with distinct norms. They didn't have a history of collaboration. And they very intentionally limited group membership to retain tribalism and to reduce conflict that might disrupt momentum. They limited community awareness through purposeful omission due to political vulnerability and community perspectives of the socio-economic ecological system. They intentionally limited public participation. And they had an unintentional but grinding over-involvement of the project champions that made the overall work viable. We came away from this believing that our research really did suggest a need for future work about how to make collaboration work in contexts like those that we live in here in Northeast Ohio. I very thoroughly enjoyed doing this, and for me, I think I have the best job on earth. I get to show up here every day and think about what I want to learn about regions like Cleveland. So thank you for the opportunity to share some of that with you. Up it's Hunter.
Well, good morning, and I'm I guess the last speaker until we have a good group discussion. First of all, I want to thank the college for taking Vibrant NEO seriously during the process. We could not have done this work, but as Joe knows, we had an impossible deadline. We had to do about a 5-year, I think Kirby, you had estimated at one point, so we had a 5-year process. We had to do it in 3 years, but actually by the time we got going, we had to do it in about 2.5 years. And we did it because we had the expertise in the college that could help provide guidance and structure to what was a very ambitious process. But I want to talk to you about and sort of review Vibrant NEO, and I'm glad that you have copies of the executive summary, the handbook, that gives a lot of the key ideas, and I'd encourage you to go on the site if you haven't already. But let's look a little bit about what we found. And you've heard this before from the other speakers. But we found the trends of outward development, inward abandonment, job sprawl, coming together to weaken our communities, not just the core cities, not just the first suburbs, but the entire region. Because as Joanna pointed out, sprawl is expensive. And it's expensive to municipalities and townships, but it's also very expensive to households. It increases the distance between jobs and people. The patterns we were able to map using a process of scenario planning were pretty dramatic. In blue are the areas that have been subject and are projected to have abandonment. The yellow are the areas of growth. Very significant abandonment patterns on the east side of Cleveland. And as others have spoken, and Joanne has gone into great detail, what we saw was the number of new households, new residents and new households was vastly exceeded by the number of housing units we were developing, creating the preconditions for abandonment. And we saw 6,500 units a year in Northeast Ohio across the 12 counties as the likely total, about $65 million a year. Now, frankly, there's been money that's come to places like Youngstown and Cleveland and Akron, including money most recently from the state that's made a big dent in this, but this is a continuing problem. We've talked about the fiscal aspects of decline that the most prosperous community in 2040, which is likely to be Medina County, was worse off than the worst off community in 2013. And several communities were at the bottom of the barrel. We did public input. We engaged over 6,000 people in the process, which is for a planning process pretty robust. And we had representation across the 12 counties that paralleled our population. So I can stand before you saying this, to the degree that it's possible to do a consensus plan across 12 counties and about 400 different jurisdictions, we probably made it. What we found was there's a strong sentiment among the participants to focus investment on the legacy cities, first-ring suburbs, but also the established towns and villages, the Medinas and Chardons and Ashtabulas of the community. But that's where people thought we should go, and that's how it was mapped. The people saw continued outward migration as possible, but not at the expense of the farmland, not at the expense of our parks, and a concerted effort to reestablish and reinvest in our established communities throughout the region, whether you're talking about what we heard in Youngstown and Warren, or what we heard in Canton or Lorraine, or clearly in Cleveland. The overarching vision was to promote investment in our established communities. That was the key prescription, and promote equity, opportunity, and economic competitiveness by improving access to the region's employment centers. And that gets to specific recommendations on transportation planning and the like. We had 4 themes, and they're detailed in the material you have today. Strengthen our established communities, increase transportation choices, protect our natural resources, and actually make better use of them, the river, the lake, the other assets that we have across Northeast Ohio, and promote collaboration and efficiency. We won a national award for this. We came forward with what Daniel Burnham would call a noble diagram. It shows in broad patterns the construct of establishing, working in our established communities, connecting them better. One of the things I found, I lived in Shaker Square at the time, and my office was in Akron. I could commute from Akron to Cleveland easily, but you could not commute from Cleveland to Akron. It didn't work unless you got on the deadhead bus because you knew the general manager of the transit authority. That didn't make any sense. So specifics came out of that. But I want to talk about Cuyahoga County because really, and I'm glad Chris was here earlier, Cuyahoga County, as the largest county, is the one that actually is most deeply affected by the patterns we see. Over projected, county losses 176,000 and 59,000 households, arriving by 2040 at the same population that had 2020. Jurisdictions as a whole seeing their expenses exceeding their revenues by 60%, not 35%, 60%. That Cuyahoga County is likely to be demolishing up to 96,000 housing units by 2040. This most dramatically we saw affecting the first suburbs and the Cleveland neighborhoods, and that we see the impact of job sprawl as we move jobs away from the GCRT network. This looks at the NOACA service area. Even Lorain and Medina County are adversely affected. But Cuyahoga County, according to the analysis we did, winds up, I said, at 60% of revenues over costs, the communities in Cuyahoga County, if the current trends continue. There are a couple of counties below that. Those are Mahoning and Trumbull County, which lost their steel industry in the late 1970s and early 80s. And have been doing things like the Mahoning River collaboration to reverse trends in those communities and actually have a repopulation initiative going on between the Chamber of Commerce and the MPO to address opportunities created by the electric vehicle industries landing, the battery industry landing in Lordstown, where you used to manufacture cruises, and we're looking at potentially 30,000 jobs in the next 20 years. And now we have the issue of how do we house folks, and how do we deal with, where's the Korean grocery? The companies are out of Korea, where do people shop? Where do they live? It's a new mindset. But Cuyahoga County faced the biggest issue. Now, I'll go briefly through, these are the maps that we produced through the use of scenario planning, a process called Envision Tomorrow. And we looked, and this was data I put together for the first suburbs. What are in magenta are the principal bus routes. What are in yellow are the RTA rail corridors. But this was the pattern in 2013. The trend was serious. It affected the first suburbs, particularly on the east side. The African American community throughout the city of Cleveland exhibited the same pattern every other ethnic group in Cleveland's history. When there's opportunity in the suburbs, people have moved out. So the neighborhoods, particularly on the southeast side, and I'm very glad that Mayor Bibb has taken an initiative to focus on those neighborhoods. Those are the most at risk and the least advantaged neighborhoods in the city, and the indications are that they are subject to severe abandonment. If we were to grow the same over the next 25 years, we see a similar pattern. Doing things differently mitigates that. So we saw in this the opportunity to reduce that by more inward investment. Let me point out a couple of things in terms of Cuyahoga County. The trend that we identified suggested that there would be a population loss of 175,000 people. If we did things differently, which was to focus on inward investment in the county communities, the population would grow by about 30,000. The impacts of doing the same are dramatic on the county. Again, about 60,000, but the swing is very high. If we did things differently in Cuyahoga County and really advance the sort of initiatives that we've talked about, you get about a 16% revenue growth over, or growth of revenue over expenses. County Executive Renane talked about linking and leveraging assets, and that's one of the key ideas that came out of the report. When you look at Cuyahoga County, it is asset rich. I don't need to tell people in this room we have the region's two largest employment centers, a robust network of parks, and a robust network of transit, and a robust transit network, both of which are publicly supported, unlike many other communities. We have the highest concentration of meds, eds, and other innovation assets, arts, sports, and entertainment, philanthropies, corporations, and local development organizations, and we are national and international talent magnets. So these are all the broad assets that when you work as I have in the last 20 years in the Mahoning County, you say, we've lost a lot of those things. You look at Cuyahoga County, so there's absolutely no excuse why Cuyahoga County should not be moving in a much more aggressive way towards a much more prosperous future. One of the interventions I must leave you with is in terms of linking and leveraging. We saw an opportunity to take better use of the transit system. Now, this is information that's now about a decade old, and there's work that's been done at the Transit Authority and certainly at county planning to advance some of these ideas. But what we talked about was development-oriented transit. We talked about transit-oriented development as though development is going to come to transit. What if we were to think about development-oriented transit? What if we were able to think about the development strategy that we build around the transit system we have? I mean, the transit system could run empty buses or full buses. It really doesn't matter. They don't make a lot of money on the fare box. That's not where the money stream comes from. They can run empty buses. But what if we looked at our land bank strategy? What if we looked at our housing development strategy? What if we looked at where seniors who wish to remain independent but don't want to live in the big house might move next to a transit line that connects them to a grocery and a drugstore? We're doing that in Youngstown now with the Transit Authority and with some help from the Governor's Office of Appalachia, because Youngstown's in Appalachia. But the possibility of doing that came forward and saying, let's align the investments in the transit network with our land bank site assembly policies, our city and county economic developments and housing strategies, and our municipal zoning policies to create a robust, regionally competitive network of quality connected places. Was the term we used. And we already have history here. In Lakewood, Shaker, the Van Aken project, the Lakewood Hospital site, and clearly University Circle in Little Italy. We see a high propensity for transit in the densest neighborhoods of Cleveland and in the first suburbs. And this is the strategic plan that was done by Joe Calabrese and his team, but I believe it's been advanced further, but identified key radiocentric lines, the straightforward lines that go out from the core city into the neighborhoods in the first suburbs. And most recently, the work that's being done by the County Planning Commission on transit-oriented development and how do you actually zone for this, developing model zoning codes. But quickly going through, we looked, again, this is work I did for the first suburbs, looking at the population density, but also the job density. The job density tends historically to concentrate along some of these corridors. Can we take advantage of that? Can we look at the west side? This is a map showing Lakewood and Cleveland and Rocky River and Fairview Park on the line, in yellow, the red line, but then in magenta, the principal lines, such as out Detroit and out Lorraine. We have the population density, but you also have job density. How can we connect people and jobs along these corridors? How can we look at what the abandonment patterns are and where they're likely to be if the trend continues? Where can sites be assembled potentially where abandonment is taking place? How can we grow differently? And one of the key insights, one of the things that was really fairly remarkable is we did a region-wide 12-county zoning and land use map. Working with the four metropolitan planning organizations in Cuyahoga County, we were able to map in general terms the zoning for all of the communities in Northeast Ohio. And we divided the density zoning for residential into those that are transit supported and those in the darker sort of tan color, and those that would be supportive of commuting park and ride type of systems. Well, what we found was that the underlying land use supported the zoning, or supported development, and the underlying zoning along these corridors suggested that these commercial districts could be made more intensely. So those are some of the insights we had, but I think the other thing that I wanted to leave you with is the basic strategy or philosophy that we adopted, which is that the 500 is a framework for the future. It's not a plan. It's a framework for becoming more prosperous, sustainable, and equitable. It's intended to inspire and inform decision-making at all levels, regional, county, and local, but the decision-making process to implement those recommendations rests with the region's communities, their citizens, and officials they elect and appoint to serve them. This is not a top-down plan. This is a set of recommendations. It's a framework that people can use, and that's why I'm so glad that this forum is put together, because it requires informed action. And this is, again, where we're working with the college over time. We can develop additional insights into how do we get ourselves into a much more competitive future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna and Hunter, for very helpful presentations in understanding the problems and the challenges that we face in our region. The next panel is going to address a number of the major themes that were set forth in the Vibrant Rio report as to what can be done to change the situation in which we found ourselves, to change this trajectory. And they will talk about strengthening established communities, increasing transportation choices, preserving and protecting natural resources, and increasing economic development. The mayor's panel, hopefully later in the afternoon, will talk about promoting collaboration and efficiency. I just wanted to mention that a terrific example of that was the work done when Mayor Ed Krause was the director of regional collaboration for the county in achieving a tremendous amount of collaboration and regionalization with respect to the joint dispatch centers. I just complimented you on all your work in
Armin takes all
creating, and also Armin for providing the support. Armin now is an executive at Cleveland State Levin College. So let me introduce our next panelist. Joe McDonald will be talking about transportation. Joe is the Director of Strategic and Environmental Planning for the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency, NOACA. Joe actually played an important role in the development of the Vibrant Rio Plan as a project manager of environment with the Northeastern Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium that Hunter led. And he has also served as a senior research associate with the American Planning Association. Greg Brown is going to talk about community development, especially in the inner core. Greg is a senior fellow at the Levin College and the executive director of Policy Bridge, which monitors urban policy issues and issues of relevance to African Americans and also other underserved communities. He previously served as executive director of Community Solutions, an organization which strongly promotes an emphasis on the link between economic development and human services. And he, prior to that, was the associate director of the Cleveland Community Building Initiative, with responsibility for operations and program activity in 4 different Cleveland neighborhoods. Matt Zone will speak about land use planning and development. Matt is the Senior Vice President and Director of Thriving Communities of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy today. For 19 years, Matt represented Ward 15 as a Cleveland City Councilman, where he was instrumental and provided enormous leadership for development in Gordon Square, for development in West 65th and along the Detroit Shoreway. And Matt has been the president of the largest organization in America representing cities and local governments, the National League of Cities. And speaking about economic development, we have Jacob Duretsky, who is the Vice President for Strategy and Research with Team NEO, where he leads research and strategy for Northeast Ohio's business development efforts. His work is focused on analyzing the regional economy to provide perspectives on how it can best perform economically. He has previously served Team NEO in business attraction efforts and led work related to site selection, engagement, and proactive energy development. So you can see why I say we have an all-star panel here, and we'll start with Joe.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity. This is going to be a slightly different perspective. I think with Hunter and Kirby and the other folks on staff talked about the Vibrant NEO Visioning Framework, there was a hope, perhaps, that the 4 major MPOs would take on the responsibility of implementation. So I want to give just a little bit of insight into what that means at NOACA. This is not going to be a comprehensive discussion about transportation in our region. Hunter and Joanna have already touched on some of those things, so has Bob. But maybe just a few vignettes, not as articulate as other folks, so maybe some pictures and some maps to colorfully illustrate a few important points. So I'll talk a little bit about who we are, although I think most people in this room know a lot about NOACA. We have board members here, other folks who've worked a lot with us. Briefly, existing challenges, some positive efforts that we're trying to do at NOACA, some best examples, and I'm glad to see that I'm going to show a few images that we have not yet seen, and then touch on the future vision that has already been discussed. So NOACA is the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization designated by the federal government for the 5 counties of Northeast Ohio. We're talking about a 12-county region, but there are others. You have AMETS, NEFCO, you have SCATS, you have Eastgate that make up the other 7 counties. And we conduct multimodal transportation and air quality related transportation planning for those 5 counties. We are also an area-wide. That's a separate designation by the governor of the state that focuses on water quality planning. We have 48 elected and appointed officials on our board. We're budgeted for 47 employees, including planners, engineers, and all of the people who provide operational support and administrative staff. And we work with a number of partners at the federal, state, and local levels. NOACA has a vision statement that is comprised of the 5 major goals of the agency: strengthen regional cohesion, preserve existing infrastructure, build a sustainable multimodal transportation system to support economic development and enhance quality of life in Northeast Ohio. And I feel like previous speakers this morning have already touched on each of these, so it's good to see that our goals are not out in left field. And I highlighted the middle 2, existing infrastructure and sustainable multimodal transportation system, because I think those are the most pertinent to the talking points that I have. Okay, you've already seen and you have in front of you a really good digestible briefing on Vibrant NEO. I'm just going to pull out one thing, and Hunter has already said it, but a central aspect of this vision, this framework, is to improve the way we move around the region and provide access to support development through transportation infrastructure. This is about choice, one of the 4 major themes of Vibrant NEO 2040. And it's about how we provide choice to people so that they have real options in terms of where they live, where they work, and how they move themselves around the 12-county region. Choice means an increased number of destinations that are easily accessible, as well as an increased variety of means or modes to reach those destinations. I'm going to harp on this idea of choice throughout the next dozen or so slides. Okay, so I have 2 slides that each have a pair of maps. And what you see in front of you is a pair of maps that illustrates the graphical interpretation of commute time to a specific destination. For this particular pair, we're talking about University Circle, one of the major regional job hubs in Northeast Ohio. The colors on the map indicate the time it would take for a person to commute to that destination. The map on the left shows the accessibility or commute time to that destination if they drive a car. The map on the right shows that same commute time if they were to take public transportation. And what I want to illustrate for you is the glaring difference between these two maps in terms of the geographic scope within our region to reach these destinations within an hour. If you are outside of the red, that means you are not going to reach that destination of University Circle within an hour. On the left, you see that red, and then you have orange, yellow, green, covers all or parts of the 7 counties shown here. We did not include all 12 counties. This came out of our Transportation Planning and Engineering Division. They focused on Metro Akron, Metro Cleveland. Compare that to the map on the right. If you take public transportation, if you are outside of a small portion of the eastern part of Cuyahoga County, you cannot get to University Circle within an hour. So when we talk about accessibility, this is a stark contrast. If you don't have a car in this region, you are essentially locked out of the economy. You are extremely limited what you can access to elevate yourself up the socioeconomic ladder. Same pair of maps, same theme, same idea. I shifted the destination to another major job hub. And this was touched on initially by Bob, but Hunter has also talked about this. You have the I-271 US 8 corridor. Hunter used to call this is the new downtown for the region. Tremendous development up and down that corridor. Again, on the left shows accessibility by car. On the right, accessibility by transit. You can reach Chagrin Highlands, which is Harvard, Chagrin, 271, that whole strip, by car, from not only it actually looks like it's a bigger area and probably goes beyond these 7 counties. You could see the red bleeds into Trumbull, Ashtabula County, but an even smaller area if you rely on public transportation. Notice the smaller area for public transportation is almost all red. Even if you can get there from this small area, it's going to take you up to an hour. Just a small collection of eastern suburbs. So I just wanted to illustrate that for our region. Okay. The rest of this presentation, for my part, will be very positive because the mayor's told me to do that, and I don't want to depress anybody more than they already are. So here are a few things that NOACA is doing. The maps that I just showed you, there is a tool that the TPED folks at NOACA have developed, the Workforce Mobility Tool. I encourage all of you to go online, workforce.noaca.org, and play around with this tool. There are other maps. We have different maps for other job hubs. We've talked about this publicly. Ali Makarachi has presented on it at our board meetings, committee meetings, council meetings. And there are other ways to look at how we can access jobs, who can access jobs. It's also broken down by economic sector. I didn't go into the numbers details in the previous slides, but we looked at the number of healthcare workers who can get to University Circle by car within an hour versus transit. The number of retail workers who can get to Chagrin Highlands. What is the dominant economic sector at these different hubs all over the region? How many people can actually access those jobs? How many jobs are accessible? So please do that. Second program I'll talk about, the Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative. This has been very popular with a lot of our elected officials, our board members, and others in the region, because the whole purpose, and this builds off of the livability principles, the 6 livability principles that also were part of the core backbone of Vibrant Neo 2040, develop transportation projects that provide more travel options, more choice, through complete streets, context-sensitive solutions to increase user safety and support positive public health impacts. We have an air quality advisory today, the second day in a row. I issue them. So when you hear about it, that comes from me, because we have anticipated exceedance of the national ambient air quality standard in this region today for ground level ozone. The precursors for ozone are significantly driven by all of the vehicular emissions that exist in our region. All of the driving around that happens across all of Northeast Ohio means that we continue to be in exceedance of the standard. We are actually getting worse. We were getting better. We've now moved from marginal to moderate. There is a risk, depending on how this season goes, that we could move to severe, not attainment. Promote reinvestment in underutilized or abandoned or vacant properties through development concepts supported by multimodal transportation systems. Support economic development through place-based transportation and land use recommendations. Connecting everyone with existing assets. You've already heard this. And then the third is NOACA has revived its van pool program. Some of you may remember back in the day that we had a van pool program at NOACA. It was gone for over a decade. It is now back. The idea meaning, how do we close the gap between employees and employers and provide all residents the opportunity to participate? Our transit network does not cover the whole region. Cuyahoga is relatively transit rich. You have Lake Tran out in Lake County. You have transit service through Akron Metro. But there are vast parts of this region that have no fixed route service. We now have 26 van pools. They go to 2 destinations, the VA, Hospital and University Circle, and R.W. Beckett and HVAC Company out in North Richville. And I've listed below the counties of origin for each of these van pool routes and the distribution. So even though the program is only about a year old, there is intense demand to find ways to get employees to places of employment, and employers are keenly interested in this. They have a hard time finding workers because of the gaps between where people live and where they work. Okay. Kirby and Hunter spent a long time developing place types for Vibrant Neo 2040. I wanted to step out of Cuyahoga County and really get into other parts of the region to illustrate good things that are happening. I think it's extremely important we talk about those good examples. How do we scale up best practices that we can find throughout the region? Let's start with what's happening in Kent. This has already been done. This is the Portage Area Regional Transit Authority Gateway Project in downtown Kent. The idea being, let's better connect the people who live in Ravenna and Kent to the university there. This also connects, there are connections to Hiram College. There are connections to Cleveland. And they put their main bus terminal right in downtown Kent and actually developed other mixed uses within that terminal. So making better connections between transportation hubs, different types of uses. It is possible to live and work and travel from downtown Kent. It is possible to live in Ravenna and get to downtown Kent, and you're right there in the midst of a walkable environment for the campus and all the shops and services that Kent offers. We've talked about Western Reserve towns. Medina is a great example. So is Chardon, Elyria, Chagrin Falls, Painesville. Even if you don't have a fixed route transit network, you can still promote active transportation through walking, through biking. Route Candles, over 150 years old, is 6 blocks west of the public square. We've had public meetings there. You could live and work and shop in Medina. You don't have to necessarily live in Lodi. You don't have to live in some of these far-flung rural parts of Medina or Lorain County and drive your car. You could. This is a choice. You're giving people choices. And this does exist throughout the region. We need to promote these types of places, establish rural villages more often. The Polifka Transit Center at Lakeland Community College in Lake County. This is a NOACA-funded TLCI project to create a transit terminal with 6 fixed route lines that connect Lakeland Community College to other parts of Lake County and to downtown Cleveland. All of our universities and community colleges should be connected. Students should not have to have a car to receive education. Struthers, Ohio is actually very near and dear to my heart. Hunter introduced me at the time, I can't remember the mayor's name. He was extremely active. I know you know his name. but the Elmton has some of the best pizza I've ever had. And I was very excited to see that just in the last just in the last 12 months, over $400,000 from ODOT and Eastgate to completely upgrade Elm Street, one of the main corridors of this town, which is, it has a downtown, but it's arguably a satellite city of Youngstown in Mahoning County, and also integrate bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure into this project, creating more accessible routes for pedestrians and cyclists between downtown and all of the public institutions that you would want to be connected in your community. The fire station, city hall, the library, the post office, etc. In closing, you've already seen this map. This is a visionary transit network on the left that came out of Vibrant Neo. How could we potentially connect the core cities of our region? On the right, NWACA has continued this work. This is our visionary rail network. Visionary meaning we don't have the funding to support this, but this is what we want to see accomplished. How do we connect the core of our city to other cities in our region? How do you connect along existing job hubs along 480, etc.? Thank you.
Okay. I don't think we're going to have enough time at the end for questions, so does anybody have a question for Joe at this point? I do have one question for you, Joe. We have a tremendous problem in this country with a tremendous number of unfilled jobs. And I'm wondering to what extent we're exacerbating that problem by making it difficult for people to get transportation to their jobs.
Yes, I touched on that in my presentation. I think it's a huge issue. We have heard from numerous employers throughout the region that they simply can't fill jobs because of where they are located and where the potential workforce is located. The job sprawl has created these very difficult to access locations for people in terms of where they live, and we don't have the transit network to get them there, hence the need for the van pool program, the need to try to work with communities to develop TLCI proposals and make them, we have planning grants, but we also have implementation grants. How can you bring housing to these areas and encourage employers to locate in areas that have greater potential for access in these core cities, these core towns, these rural village centers, etc.
Thank you, Joe.
So one thing we did in Solon, we have about 30,000 jobs, 900 companies, and so we contacted Share Mobility. It's a Columbus entity through the help of RTA, which piloted this program. Yep. And what they do is they pick up our workforce in Maple Heights and Southgate, bring them right to the company. Instead of having to walk that last 3/4 or a mile through snow, they bring them right there and they drop them off. So a lot of our companies are starting to look at that as an option. We just had a big job fair the other day, and so it's really using like a company like Share Mobility is really going to start to help us out.
And Southgate has a transit center, so there are multiple fixed route lines that can get people to that point where they can then take that transportation.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. I've been asked to talk about the issue of how do we strengthen established communities, and one of the things that I thought was really important to think about as I was preparing to talk to you this morning was kind of articulated by Dr. Ganning when she said, how do we really think about enhancing and increasing the quality of life of people who are already here? I think that's not only a central question, but it is the preeminent question that we have to think about if we're going to have a floor or foundation that we build on to make a strong and vibrant Northeast Ohio region. So I want to go back about 13 years when I was asked to and recruited to join a local planning team that was focused on a national concept funded by the Kellogg Foundation that was looking at the concept of health and racial disparities and inequities in major metropolitan areas across the United States. What were the causes? What did we need to do differently? How do we think about the work in a way that is collaborative, engaging, and allows for diversity and inclusion of all participants in our communities. So based on working with that organization called the National Collaboratives for Health Equity, previously called Place Matters, over an 8 or 9 year period, I started to really think about how we engage people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our cities and surrounding suburbs and in our rural areas in a way that help us to better understand what they would like to see and how they want to participate in actualizing that work. That led us to becoming involved in a local initiative here called the Health Improvement Partnership Cuyahoga, which once again looked at the issues of racial and health disparities and inequities based on the promise of understanding what the social determinants of health would be and how those social determinants intersect in a way that have implications for where people live and what the quality of their life would be, where they live. And from that, we started to articulate a framework. And that framework is similar to what we did in NEOS with Hunter and his group, working as a board member on that, and subsequently led to what we see now in several other municipalities around racism as a public health crisis. And that framework is, what are the areas that are critically important for us to focus on that will help people better participate and reach their maximum potential? And how do we provide a runway, supportive services, and opportunity structures that will allow for them to be able to engage with decision makers, people who are in charge of resources, and also the business community in such a way that we not only strengthen our communities, but we create a social fabric that has been dissipated over the last 70 years. So when I think about it from a policy bridge standpoint, which is the think tank that I lead and have been leading for the last 14 years, we decided back in 2019 to create a framework off of that framework, off of your framework. It starts with the idea that we can do all the work we want to do at a programmatic or intervention level. We do great work at that level. But we don't see the impact when we look at population measures. We don't see change. In fact, Bob was very, very distinctive in his comments today. We've held the line, but it's holding the line, the status quo, what we really want for our community. So we think about it as, once again, reformulating our thinking, because what we know is every system is exquisitely designed to produce the result it gets. That's right. So we design systems, and the outcomes from those systems are what we have designed them to be. So if we want something different, we have to go back to the design stage, the thinking stage. We have to start to think about, what are the values that undergird what we want to do? What are the attitudes that permeate our thinking and keep us from overcoming challenges? Who are the people that need to be in the room to help advise us as we think about those things that are necessary to engage in? And how do we center it in the thought of equity, fairness, and being just for everybody? This region is a critically important region. As Hunter so aptly said, we are asset rich. But we squander those assets when we don't maximize the potential of every individual's opportunity to participate fully and use those assets to their fullest opportunity. There are, and I'll talk about for the next few minutes, several initiatives, starting with Policy Bridge's urban agenda, that is trying to bring people together to think about this idea of how do we think differently about systems development and system implementation, so that we work not just from the bottom up, but from the top down, and change the opportunity structures for people who inherently have been left behind. When you look at the county or the city's racism as a public health crisis work, the coalition in the city is using what they call a results-based approach to try to think about how to use data as an informed way of creating new methods to create systems that operate for the benefit of the majority and not the minority. The county is doing the same work at a different level. In the city, you also have an abundance of organizations in the healthcare sector, community development sector, transportation, healthcare, all working to think about what is the intersection of all that work and how do we move forward, not just in a shared measurement way with a common agenda, but how do we move forward in a way that we can actualize through demonstrated results on the ground for those people who need to be moved forward: employment opportunities, educational opportunities, better healthcare status, opportunities to transportation that make sense for them. So when we talk about strengthening existing communities, we can't have that conversation unless we're willing to start with who's not at the table and why aren't they there. The second thing we have to do is start to challenge ourselves to say, if we've done it that way and it isn't working, what do we need to do? Let's break the mold and start over. We don't know what we're doing. We haven't known what we're doing. So I challenge us all to say, Vibrant Neo 2040 was an excellent opportunity for us to think prospectively about what we wanted our region to look like. We're at a tipping point, and the closer we get to that tipping point, the more dire the circumstances can be for people that live in Northeast Ohio. Many of us are leaders. We've been leaders for a while. We've had opportunities to pontificate and think about these things. But we also need to be able to say, as I was told when I used to play ball, we have to call the number and say the play didn't work, run another one.
That's right.
The plays we're running aren't working. We need a new set of plays, we need new standards, we need measurements to support those standards, and we need accountability measures to hold us all responsible for that. So I hope that wasn't a Debbie Downer, Mayor. But you know, I'm old. Most folks know me. I'm an old school guy. I come with it, and I think we have to think about what is all this work for? It's for people, and if it's not for people, then it's not for anything.
That's right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Are there any questions for Greg at this point? I did have one question, and in a way you've actually touched on this in your remarks, but my question related to this work done by Richard Rothstein, who wrote a book called The Color of Law, The Forgotten History of How Government Segregated America. And as a number of people who are familiar with that book already know here, he argued that government agencies after World War II followed a discriminatory policy in administering federal housing aid and GI support and insurance guarantees that really served to create segregated neighborhoods. That this policy has had a tremendous long-term impact because it's created greater equity in housing for a certain part of the population, largely white population, and kept the other part of the population, minorities, from realizing that same kind of equity in home values. And so how do you feel we're doing today in sort of addressing this historic inequality and this historic discrimination and trying to overcome it?
Well, thanks for the question, Mayor. I will go back to what Bob kind of said this morning. I think it's a mixed picture. I think on the one hand, we have acknowledged without any significant pushback that discriminatory practices did exist and that they did advantage some and disadvantage others. That's without question now. So I think people understand that. I think where we struggle is what are the remedies and how do we do those remedies in not an equal way, but an equitable way. And what that means is just as we've given priority to some that were preeminently in the discriminatory practices, some were benefited and given preferences. In an equitable situation, you have to meet people where they are and lift those boats so that you can get them to where they need to be. That's a question of our political will. That's a question of our attitudes and our values. And I think we're struggling with that right now, especially in the political arena. But I think as a country, we're struggling to figure out who we are, especially in the 21st century. I think there are a couple of things we need to do. I think we need to eliminate those systems that continue to create discriminatory practices that lead to those kind of disparities. But the second thing we need to do is what my friend Jacob's going to talk about in a few minutes. We have to think about the economic and wealth building capacity of citizens so that they have an opportunity to participate in home ownership and affordable housing opportunities that don't exist today.
And it just would make the observation, it's interesting how so much of this ties together, because what Joe was talking about was the difficulty of people who are disadvantaged in reaching jobs. And that's part of the equation too, to allow for that and to ensure that that happens. Great. Any other questions anybody has? Okay. At this point, Matt?
Thank you, Mayor Lycan, and it's good to be with all of you. I have some prepared remarks, and so I'm going to read them. I'll go off script a little bit, but the remarks are, foundational of what I learned here as a student at Levin College over 30 years ago, my nearly 20 years on Cleveland City Council, and I had the high honor in 2017 of serving as the president of the National League of Cities, going to other cities throughout America to see on how they function and operate. And cities don't function and operate alone. You heard that from Bob. Cleveland is not competing against Berea. Cleveland's not competing against Medina. It's our region. We're competing against Mumbai. Our region's competing against Shanghai. And so, I'll just get into my comments, and it might be a little doom and gloom. I'll say that up front, but I'll paint a rosy picture at the end if that's okay. The physical and economic health of one community depends on how resources are managed and how decisions are made by dozens of communities nearby, as well as the cooperation of state and federal governments. Northeast Ohio is a microcosm of a growing American problem. We spread our metropolitan region and its shrinking resources dangerously thin. We're sprawling without growth when we should be growing smarter and together. Since 2002, we've consumed more than 100,000 acres of farmland in Cleveland's metropolitan area without any growth in population. So instead of becoming stronger, we've grown outward and away from one another. And our schools, our retailers, our jobs, our places of worship, they follow the people. And we've created this problem. State policies have encouraged, you heard Joanna talk a little bit about this, have encouraged corporations to settle in cornfields, and towns have paved the way for the urban exodus with new roads, sewers, and schools. And for a decade, Ohio has employed a naive, anywhere in Ohio economic development policy, when what we desperately needed was a smarter strategy. Our older cities and towns now patrol and plow and maintain the same number of streets that they had decades ago, with only a fraction of their peak population traveling to them. We saw this morning from Bob and Joanna and others, the city of Cleveland, we had 10,000 streets in 1950 and 914,000 people. Today, we have the same number of streets, but less than half that population. And at the same time, Ohio's population has barely grown. And the state's anemic growth belies the fact that Ohio's recovery from the Great Recession has lagged every other state. All you need to do is drive through any number of outer ring suburbs in America, and you'll see boarded up and vacant strip malls surrounded by vast sea of empty parking. These forlorn monuments to the real estate crash are not going to come back to life even when the economy fully recovers. And that's because the demand for housing that once supported commercial activity in many exurbs isn't coming back either. The outward expansion of development in metro areas has been occurring at an expense of the urban cores. And this is particularly true in older, mature metro regions where population and employment are relatively stable, meaning that the gains in ex-urban areas result in further losses in cities and town areas. You couple this with decreasing financial resources in urban cores, and at the same time, those financial costs are increasing to address the needs of an aging housing stock. Ohio's lawmakers' indifference to urban areas imperils the whole state and its economy. The 7 large metro areas, Akron, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, and Youngstown, account for about 71% of Ohio's population, or about 80% of the GDP, making it more metropolitan state than most. But Ohio's cities continue to be the economic driver that power the Buckeye State. And we have this competition between countries and states and cities for talents and jobs, and that could be actually very healthy. But governments, they try to incentivize and formulate policies that promote economic growth and improve local assets such as workforce development programs and quality of life enhancements. But the efficient regulatory and tax structures sometimes challenges us. We need to start looking at not such a siloed effect and how we're working across municipal borders. In Cuyahoga County, we have 57 cities and 2 townships, 59 communities. When I left City Council right before the 2020 census was counted, based on projections that Notice here at Levin College produced, the population in the ward that I represented was over 30,000. It was larger than Mayor Weiss's city in Shaker Heights. We need to start working more cooperatively together, and so it's not a zero-sum game, but I'm going to focus a little bit and pivot, like painting the big picture about what has held us back to the neighborhood that I represented, where I was born and raised. I ran for city council because I didn't have aspirations of being mayor, governor, or president of the United States. I was a planner. I came out of this college. I wanted to make the community that I lived in better. And growing up as a small child, I saw how my neighborhood changed and really ran down. I grew up in the Gordon Square neighborhood and the Detroit Shore neighborhood. In the late 60s, when there was a lot of civil unrest all across America, we had tremendous white flight that left our community. And in 1975, when that federal desegregation lawsuit was filed, and before it was implemented in 1978, we had continued white flight. But not only white flight, the black and brown population that lived in my neighborhood who had money, they left too. And the only people who was left in my community were working class and poor people. And so all in the 80s and 90s, we worked really hard to just stabilize the neighborhood. And, I was elected in 2002, and the first thing I did is we engaged a consultant, and we went through a planning exercise. And that later morphed into the creation of the Gordon Square Arts District. We looked at the physical assets around. You heard earlier Chris Ronayne, our county exec, talk about authenticity. Like, if you want to create vibrancy at a place, it has to be authentic. It can't be a created community that is not authentic to place. We knew we had an old theater. We knew Cleveland Public Theater was there. We knew Near West Theater wanted to build a new theater. And so we built a whole economic development strategy around the arts that was unique to that place. At the same time, supporting our asset, which was our greatest natural resource, which was Lake Erie in our backyard. Edgewater Park was right there. So you saw the infusion of a lot of public dollars to remake the West Shoreway. Over $100 million went into it. And I like to say it's a little bit cheesy, but the public sector, you know, that's the yeast that raises the dough from the private sector. Private sector will follow. When they see government is investing in infrastructure, in housing, private sector will come behind. So we worked very diligently remaking our lakefront. From the mouth of, I was fortunate to represent from the mouth of the Cuyahoga River all the way to the city of Lakewood. And at that time, when we were creating neighborhood and remaking it, we wanted to make sure it was an inclusive neighborhood. You heard my friend Greg talk about inclusivity for all. You know, people always would say to me, how do you turn around West 65th so fast and Detroit? I said, it's because we focused on low-income housing projects and historic renovations, historic tax credit projects. And we built over nearly 800 units of affordable housing, over $40 million of projects that supplied that affordability component to the neighborhood. After all, those are the people who work at the coffee shops and the restaurants. And we created this vibrancy, walkable, 18-hour neighborhood. And at the same time, we built over 1,000 new units of housing. In 2013, we worked with Jacob's organization, Team Neo. They did an economic impact study of all of that economic development activity that occurred in that neighborhood. We created over 115 new small businesses with over 1,000 full-time jobs. We were returning $4 million in income and sales tax back to the county to use. And all of the vacant land, you heard me earlier talk about, you know, the 30,000 vacant lots in our city, and you're going to probably hear Chief Epstein when he makes his remark how the mayor is really focused on putting that into productive use. There weren't any vacant lots left in the Gordon Square neighborhood because we did such a successful job of infill housing and creating a vibrancy where people want to live. You know, this morning, President Bloomberg opened up talking about the provost, Nigamoth. He lives in Gordon Square. He chose that neighborhood because it's an open and inclusive community. You know, I was blessed in my time in government because I lived in a diverse neighborhood. I represented a majority, slightly majority black and brown ward. 26% African American, 24% Hispanic, 2% Asian. And I always brought that mindset to all the conversations. If we're going to do development, if we're going to build community, how are we building it for all people? Because let's face it, the issues that have challenged our reason have been a couple. They've been education, they've been race, and it's been crime. Why have people left the center city? And right now, what has happened in Cleveland, it's spreading to those first ring suburbs, it's spreading to the outer ring suburbs. So it's really incumbent upon all of you, decision makers, policy makers, elected officials in this room to say, we can't be doing the same thing over. Greg, what's the definition of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Right, right. And so, like, we have to stop doing what we're doing here in Cuyahoga County. Hunter talked about 400 different taxing authorities, municipal governments in the 12 county region. Is it 400? I mean, we can't be in the business of government. We have to be in the business of people. And if it means at some point us rethinking how Cuyahoga County looks and how we operate, you know, Louisville had the courage in the 1960s to go to a metro form of government. Portland created a smart growth ring. It was, before 1972, Portland was not a nice city. But they created a smart growth ring around that city and attracted development and prevented development from going out to the hinterland. I know we all want development in our backyard, but it really, we need to be smarter on how we grow it together. And I'm sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now, Mayor, and entertain any question anyone might have.
Are there questions for Matt? Yes.
Sort of a question and sort of a statement. First of all, you should be very proud of Boyd Square. My wife and I go over there often and have a lot of fun over there, so thank you for that. I attended a conference one time and the mayor of Stockton made this quote. He said, status quo has many friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm a lifelong Clevelander. I look at the lakefront and get a little concerned that there has not been much development as far as work. You hear other communities. I was in Las Vegas the other day. They're talking about building a baseball stadium to try to get the Oakland's team to come to Vegas. But what do you all see? I mean, I'm asking you that, but basically it's an open question. But to get over this hump of status quo, what needs to happen? Where do you see it? You mentioned as far as the government is concerned, mm-hmm. and helping the private sector, but where do we really need that infusion to get that shot in the arm in this moment?
It's not going to be This is not going to be a popular thing that I'm going to say. I think the city and the county, all the 57 cities and 2 townships, really need to rethink about. Everyone wants that local control. We need to go to a regional-wide smart land use planning process that will really advance development. Now we can concentrate assets and share assets where they need to be. We can create housing strategies that really work, job centers that work, transportation. I was pretty offended that some people took criticism towards County Executive Ronayne for creating a transportation department. Some of you represent smaller communities in our county. What the county can do is be a convener and drive resources and collaborator to make sure that we can plan together. I really think it's time that Cuyahoga County should start having a hard conversation. Should we go to a metro form of government? I mean, what we're doing now is not working. And I think all of us need to be willing to say, I'll sacrifice my job. I walked away from politics because I wanted to make an impact in a bigger footprint and region. I don't know if there's the political will to do that here in Cuyahoga County, but if you want to turn that graph around that Hunter showed, shifting that to a 16% net increase, the only way to do it, I believe, is to go to a metro form of government.
Yes.
This might be a question for all the panelists. So people don't like sprawl, but they also don't like density. There's a lot of NIMBYs out there, so density is really the solution to a lot of the problems that we're talking about. So how do you overcome the NIMBYs out there that don't like density?
Go ahead, Mark. Why don't you start, Matt, and something.
It's funny, lifelong Clevelander. It's a funny story. So we're building new townhomes on West 67th, north of Detroit, and I'm pitching the project, and a resident says, well, I don't like that because you're going to block my view, and I won't be able to see the sunset, but it's a big vacant lot, and maybe some development will be good. Flash forward about 5 years later, we're building the Edison project. And somebody who lived in the townhome said, I don't want to see that project going in because you're going to block my view of the downtown skyline. It was the same conversation all over. I think that's where leaders have to lead. And they have to be willing to not worry about the criticism that comes with it. And it's density of not only market rate housing, it's affordable housing. And that's the biggest NIMBYism right there. I was a councilman for a month and a half, and I was supporting a transitional housing project for women who were just recently released from prison, who are being reunited with their children. It had all the wraparound services in there. And the day before the community meeting, people put flyers out saying I was bringing rapists and murder to our neighborhood. And you know what I did is I confronted that issue right at the onset from the meeting. You need to have courage to speak out and not be afraid of what a very, very vocal minority, we'll say. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little worked out. Greg, you want to say something about India?
No, I'm kind of with you. I think leaders lead, but I also think that sometimes you have to give people the economic argument, which is the cost of sprawl versus the cost of density. And then sometimes you have to lead people to water, but you can't make them drink. Some people are never going to go along with it because that's their predilection. And as long as we live in a democracy, that's their right. But I do believe that most people are going to be rational in their approach. And if they understand that they can live in a more dense situation and it's not going to cost them as much to do that, they're going to think that's a benefit as opposed to living in a sprawled condition where they have to assume the cost of that sprawl, which is going to enhance or decrease their quality of life overall.
Yes, Mayor Bain.
To Matt's comment, I agree with you that it would be nice to have this regional government. I think that would be more efficient, it would be effective. It's not going to happen though. And I think we have to confront, at least in any sort of a near term, let alone a midterm. And I think we have to deal with that reality. A dozen years ago, I was involved in a very small planning exercise to see if there were 5 East Side communities that would even consider merging together. And it was dead from the first meeting. It lacked leadership, it lacked the political will, and more so it lacked the support of communities. The highest level of objection to the idea actually came out of Mayor Holbert's community of Woodmere, where you had this majority population who were very proud of their community, deservedly, and they had zero interest in trying to merge themselves into a larger community where they would lose that status of being the majority. And I think that revealed a reality that what we need to do is not get hung up on we need a regional government. We have to put it all under the single umbrella, which would have been great and successful if we had been Columbus and Indianapolis and all these communities that managed that idea. We have to deal with our reality and figure out how are we going to effectively achieve many of the things that you get from that model without going through the political exercise of trying to get merger votes, a vote upon a vote upon a vote of any one community to achieve it. It's not going to happen, I don't think. So I think the challenge is to figure out how do we otherwise get around this barn to achieve what is recognized has to happen, but without stumbling on the regional idea.
Mayor Krause?
Just to touch on a little, and I understand Rick's point, I think we also have to build like the community infrastructure, especially when you're targeting international population. So our population is about 30% foreign born. And so I saw what happened, so we built a Chinese school many years ago. They have a school at our high school on Sunday. So now, hence looking forward, 15% of our population is Chinese. We had our first synagogue 20 years ago. Hence, now we have a large Jewish population as a result of that. Thirdly, we built a new Chagrin Valley Islamic Center, or mosque. It was very controversial at the time, and again, our leadership stood up and said, not here. We're going to have a mosque here because we have a synagogue, we have churches, and our Muslim population has grown exponentially, particularly folks right from Pakistan, Turkey, the Middle East, obviously, and a lot of it has to do with the jobs hub. And then lastly, we just opened a Sikh temple that opened up. And one of the comments from the Sikh community was, well, we saw what was happening. You have a Chinese school, you now have a Jewish population, you welcome the Muslim community, so we feel welcome. So those are the community infrastructure that you have to build if you want to expand, because schools are important, jobs are important, but religious observance is also important for people, that they can feel welcome in the community, and we need to kind of replicate that, particularly if we want to attract folks from outside the United States.
Okay, well, thank you. We are going to have to move on. Is there, Joanna, do you want to ask one more question?
Jacob, before we get lunch.
Yes, no, go ahead.
I wondered what your thoughts were about my idea. I like your idea very much of regional governance, and I hear what's being said here, and they're right, it's a really tough sell. So the idea I've advanced here is about regional fee structures to overcome the market failures that we create through sprawl, which still requires a governance structure and a set of rules that we don't currently have. In my mind, that's still a high hurdle, but it's a much lower hurdle, I think, in regional government. So I wonder what your thoughts were about that.
Anybody?
Were you asking me that question?
I am, because you brought up the idea of regional government.
I mean, it's a Northeastern Ohio problem. We always like to stay in our little comfort lane. I've talked too much, so I'll be quiet.
Well, yeah, I think we do need to move on with Jacob's presentation, but let me just say that there are many things that can be done by way of collaboration among cities short of regional government, and the Joint Dispatch Centers is one example of that. There's a lot of resistance to it, but certainly there are many other opportunities for regional collaboration to make the region more efficient.
Okay, Mayor, I was just going to say, that's the first. I think you can get there, but I think you have to start with collaboration and then integration to move to the formalized structure. And I think people have to be willing to risk. Yeah. And if you're going to be a leader and you're going to be risk averse, then that's not leadership. So we have to be clear about what is and what isn't. And I'll stop there. If anybody wants to have that discussion with me after this session, we can talk. Okay?
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to thank you and the panel. When you want to call your therapist after the discussion, you know it's impactful, right? So Jacob Doritsky, Team NEO, brief commercial. For those not familiar, Team NEO Regional Economic Development Group, 18 counties, Cleveland, Akron, Canton, Youngstown, and the Jobs Ohio partner for the Northeast Quadrant of the state. Jobs Ohio Privatized Economic Development Group. Funded uniquely through the liquor sales. So if you're trying to not think about this conversation later, don't reach for a beer or a glass of wine, reach for the vodka. And you're helping economic development. So I'm going to start actually with an economic development joke, and then I'll quickly get depressing too. But I thought, why not start on a high note? And I've got two daughters who often are a key element of everything I talk about. And one's 21, junior at Kent State. I talk all about talent alignment. She doesn't listen to me. She's in fashion and psychology. And I've got an 8-year-old who's one of her favorite things to do at night is look up dad jokes, right? So we make this routine of looking up dad jokes. And none of them are good, and these aren't going to be good either. But they're still the closest thing you can get to economic development jokes. But it goes back to, and you'll see, I promise I'll come full circle, something that Hunter mentioned. The first is, what do you call someone who plays symphony on top of a really large truck? A semiconductor. Look, this is the high point of my talk. That's it. And what's a Tesla's favorite song? The Electric Slide. I know, even worse. Okay, but why do I share those? Not because dad jokes, well, they are kind of inherently interesting, but I share those because Northeast Ohio is at a really interesting inflection point in how we think about the economy. And I think we've heard a lot of rationales for how we have to think about making the case for density and making the case for doing things differently. But I think there's also an economic rationale that even if you're, the most callous, shrewd business person, has to resonate with you. And when we think about the future of these industry opportunities right now, Team NEO alone, with our partners, talks to about 1,000 companies a year. We do projects with 100 to 200 companies a year. Right now, when we look at our lead pipeline, the number of companies thinking about making an investment in Northeast Ohio, 11 of those are related to the semiconductor industry because of Intel. 19 of those are related to the EV industry because of what's going on in the Mohawk Valley here. We have tremendous opportunity, and that's for Northeast Ohio. So people say, why didn't Intel come to Northeast Ohio? Well, it tried. It started in Lorain, right? We didn't have a site big enough for it. Why? Because the site they ultimately chose is about the size of the city of Lakewood. We don't have that. Our biggest site that we have right now ready to go is about 800 acres. The site they ultimately chose is about 5,000 acres. So as I talk about the themes of what we think about as a vibrant economy index, there are really two takeaways: that there are economic motivations behind a lot of the conversation we're having here, but when we have a conversation about data, we can't just start with outcomes, right? We hear all the time about GDP and per capita income and employment growth. That's great. Those things don't happen in a vacuum. We have to start to think about the enablers and having a consistent, hard conversation. What I said 4 years ago when we started this process, the intestinal fortitude to really challenge ourselves to have a hard conversation, because it shouldn't be up to people giving speeches at the City Club 4 years ago, and it shouldn't be up to a headline that glosses over the front page of the Plain Dealer. It should be about that hard conversation, strategy alignment, and what we do to advance that over time. So what does that mean? What is the Vibrant Economy Index? The Vibrant Economy Index is a tool we came up with that said, let's stop talking about GDP, employment, income to start, and let's start focusing on those areas of the economy that we can enable. There are 4 general areas of the economy that we can enable: talent, equity, resiliency, and innovation. We can drive each of those in very different ways. But as we think about the interdependence of those and how we enable them, we have to start with having a hard conversation. Probably got some of this from Joanna. I'm guessing some of it from Bob. I'm sorry I couldn't see your presentations. But when you look at the demographics and the nature of what Northeast Ohio faces, past 20 years, we've lost about 170,000 people. Population is going down. Labor force size is declining. We have seen incomes continue to stagnate, and in some sectors like manufacturing, not grow at all. So we face structural challenges. And when I talk about those 1,000 companies that we talk to every year, it starts with talent at its core. 91% of companies last year, 91% listed talent is the key element to them making an investment in Northeast Ohio. They won't think about growth here if they can't think about talent here. And just think about 3 crucial sectors of the Northeast Ohio economy: manufacturing, healthcare, and IT. Combined, make up 40 to 50% of our GDP directly, right? Incredibly important to everything that we do here. Think about the fact that 50 to 55,000 jobs in those 3 sectors alone went unfilled by Northeast Ohio residents last year. When you think about the talent problem that we have, we're not simply going to grow our way out of this. It has to be thinking about the assets that we have here, the people that we have here, and how we connect people to more opportunity. When you think about variables that are highly correlated with economic growth long term, there are ones that we can't control. Mother Nature might, like temperature in January. There are others that we can control, like percent of the population with a post-secondary education. When you look at Northeast Ohio, the way we define it, we compared ourselves to 12 other markets across the country. We have the lowest bachelor's plus rate amongst any of those peer metros that we looked at. We have the highest rate of some college starts, but people who don't finish.
Yeah.
Is that not a policy solution? Yeah. Is that not begging for something to be done about it? We have the talent assets, but we're not doing anything to advance it in a systemic and structural way. Why? Because we got this big equity issue hanging over our head, right? So why don't we have the talent that we need? Because talent can't look like talent always look. When you look at equity in Northeast Ohio, we've heard about the transportation issues. When you think about those 3 sectors, again, just to keep on the theme of manufacturing, IT, and healthcare, 19 of the top 20 jobs in those sectors, top 20 meaning family sustaining wages, low risk of automation, high projected growth, 19 of the top 20 are underrepresented by minority communities, who make up 22% of the workforce. 15 of the top 20 are underrepresented by women. We have to do better if we're going to connect the dots and we're going to grow as a community. Equity has to be a core strategy, not just an afterthought to that. We aren't going to grow our way out of this, and everything you've heard today has to be part of the solution to that. Resiliency. Resiliency means having the infrastructure in place so that when a company does want to make an investment, they're ready, they can do it quickly. Last year, 65% of the leads that we have from manufacturers, and manufacturing still matters here, right? From manufacturers wanted at least 250,000 square feet, wanted at least 30 plus acres. That represents somewhere around 15% of the properties we have available here. So if a company says, I want to invest in the next 12 to 18 months, and we're not ready for that investment, it's going to be hard to keep them here. Luckily, folks like Jeff and the city of Cleveland and the county are working on strategies to put in place, but that's not something you can do overnight, right? And then finally, innovation. When we think about the assets that we have here, when we think about the innovation project, the innovation district investment that was made, the partnership opportunities, the link between Cleveland State and Case Western, we have to continue to think about what the future of our economy looks like in any iteration. And so that can be additive manufacturing, that can be the industrial Internet of Things, that can be AI, that can be the variety of technology jobs that they have here in the economy that aren't Google but are Progressive and are Sherwin-Williams and are Nestle and heavy technology users. And we have to think about the future of our innovative economy and how we continue to grow and how we think about not what the work looks like today and the industry base looks like today, but what it looks like in the next 5 to 10 years. But without adequate talent, without everyone being included, and without the right infrastructure in place, we're going to have a really hard time achieving that growth, and those population dynamics are catching up to us. We're about 5 to 10% older than the country as a whole. When you talk to manufacturers, we did a survey of about 700 companies. 69% said that they are facing a talent shortage based on the age of their workforce in the next 5 years. It's coming, it's here, and it's going to hit us in the head. So what's one other way to think about this? Well, the first is, let's start with those 4. Even just follow the line. If you started to think about talent, really focused on that some college worker, guess what? Too often that some college worker tends to be a minority or a woman in the community who isn't getting through. So now we've identified a population who's being excluded from the labor force. We're going to become more innovative with more ideas, with more people participating. And if we can have the resiliency and infrastructure in place that can help guide that, it means things as simple as broadband access. It is absolutely disturbing the fact that so many people in our community, rural, urban, still don't have broadband access. I mean, we all have our phones and we take it for granted. When 13% of minority populations throughout Northeast Ohio don't have broadband access, you don't compete as a region. Let's have those conversations, then we can talk about GDP growing, right? Because if we do all that well, GDP will grow over time. Hopefully incomes will grow over time. Employment can grow over time. We can think about retaining more of the people who come here and keeping them here. And we think about attracting new workers. And then finally, does that translate to prosperity over time? Are we seeing closing in the income gap? Are we seeing people more successful in what they do? All this framework, a little theoretical, right? But all of it has policy implications behind it. And I'll give you one that we're focusing on increasingly that I think is important to the context of how you have some of these conversations and maybe articulate it in terms of the economic necessity for some of these, which is a new tool that we call ESG plus P. It's on our website, you can look it up. But if you think about companies historically, what they look for when they make an investment, they're thinking about time, risk, and money. How quickly can I make the investment? How risky is this investment going to be? How much is it going to cost me? No one's saying those variables should go away. But how about if you start thinking about environment, social, particularly the corporate social responsibility, and governance, corporate governance, ethics, how you think about all of those elements, and then start to think about those variables within the plus P, which is place. And how do you start to articulate to a business that wants to make an investment that it's not just about going to, and I'm not picking on Ashland, we're kind of agnostic, going to Ashland because you can quickly get 60 acres of a greenfield, put up a property, get your utilities connected, and you're on your way. But making the argument that, you know, what you're really going to need is labor force. You're not in an area that has a density of population. You really don't have great access to public transit that can get people to those. You know, you're saying equity is key and core to your mission, but you're really not in a population that's going to draw that equity that you're seeking. So how do you put those variables in front of people and then help them to make a more holistic decision about what that looks like? How does this look in the real world? I'll tell you. You have a company like MCPC, Andy Jones, who's a board member of ours, leads one of our talent development council efforts, and is just an advocate for talent and for Northeast Ohio and Greater Cleveland at MCPC and now Fortress. Went from an exurban suburb down to the Midtown corridor, made a strategic investment. In the first year alone, being on a public transit route, part of what they wanted to see happen was growth in the number of minority applicants they had. it grew by 20% in the first year, just because they made a couple of strategic investments. The number of total candidates that they had grew by something like 15 or 18% in the first year alone, because of where they were strategically located. Is that everyone? No. Could Intel have been that company? No. But it does give us a different framework and a different way to start to think about the hard conversations we have to have and keep the economy at the forefront of that. There are a lot of reasons, well articulated today, why we should care about it beyond that, but I think sometimes the economic argument can also win the day.
Are there questions for Jacob?
Yeah.
I've got one.
Oh, great.
So you were talking about our proportion of people with bachelor's degree is lower than a lot of the other nations we compare to.
Yep.
And earlier today we heard about how, I don't know, some huge percentage of jobs are going unfilled and they are jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree. And I would like to think that at least some of those, although it wasn't discussed, are higher quality jobs. I mean, a retail job does not require a bachelor's degree, but that's not where we want to be, right?
Yep.
So I'm just curious about Team Neo's thinking about, I mean, I think there is a trend to get away from throwing all our eggs in the bachelor's degree basket and making sure that we diversify the workforce such that all of the jobs can be met. Hopefully, as I said, grow the ones that are quality that may not need the bachelor's degree. So I'm just curious about your thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, well, one, the point is spot on. We are seeing less. Now, less doesn't mean it's been cut in half, but we are seeing less jobs, particularly in the technology and professional services fields that require a 4-year plus degree, which when you talk to companies has often been a proxy for, soft skills, right? You made it through college, can type. What we're seeing companies go more toward are things like coding boot camps, hiring folks who have gone through non-traditional paths, getting people right out of high school who have had some entry-level coding and training them on the job. We can code at Tech Elevator. There are a lot of those who have grown significantly. One of the programs that we did with Jobs Ohio during the pandemic was for people who had been displaced in their jobs and subsidized at 0% part of their loans to take on coding bootcamp classes, because that is becoming increasingly meaningful. The promotion element of it. When you look at manufacturing, the story of the Northeast Ohio economy over the last 20 years has been the Rust Belt, right? It's the story of many parts of the Midwest. Well, the Rust Belt hides the fact that manufacturing still employs 257,000 people here, and job projections show over the next 5 to 7 years, we'll have about 100,000 job openings. Have you talked to anyone who's a welder at Lincoln Electric, who's making $120,000 a year after 9 months of training?
That's right.
Not a bad gig, but we haven't pushed people towards some of those opportunities. If you go and call Intel and ask them what they need, the majority of Intel's positions are going to be 2 years or less that they're looking to hire. They are related to engineering technicians and technologists. And same is true for the EV work that's taking place. Pretty much all they're looking for is some skilled assembly and things like that, but generally 2 years. Do you know where you can get the most graduates throughout the state of Ohio for those two roles that they need right now? Lorraine County Community College and Stark State College combined make up about 1/3 of the total graduates that we have in those two areas. It is absolutely imperative that we change the conversation about BA+. Look, it's worked for a lot of people in this room. I still think it's very meaningful. My time in grad school here was some of the best years of my life, but we have to think differently, and we have to help, as a part of that ESG, help companies think differently about it too.
Any other questions for Jacob? Yes.
Well, question in general, how soon, you keep talking about having hard conversations, is there any thought to possibly Vibrant Neo having quarterly hard conversation gatherings where you bring people together so you understand that the conversation's going to be difficult, check your ego at the door, come in and mix it up, and have these hard conversations, because there's a vast amount of intellectual capital in this room, and we're all talking about data and analytics when most residents aren't going to focus in on that. So 2 things. One, how soon can we start having these quarterly hard conversations? And secondly, is there something more, how shall we say, resident friendly that communities would be able to take away from this to share, so that we can start that bottom-up conversation?
Well, I should just mention the Vibrant Neo board is housed at NOACA, and it is a board that's working on the answer to that very question and currently considering a mission statement that really is going to hopefully answer that question and bring people together for these kinds of discussions. And some of the people who are working on that very project are in the room. Howard Rabb is a member, Lou Shaw, and Mike Summers are all members of that group that is really trying to come to grips with the very question you've asked and to answer it and to bring people together for these very hard discussions on some of the issues that have been raised today.